they changed this.
Oh, this is very nice because it shows you how the density of the air went through. Oh, I like that.
I'd like to introduce Rafael Lozano-Hemmer, an exceptional artist, and Rafael has produced this wonderful piece behind us. It's very, very interesting, the concept of speech. And what does this represent, Rafael?
So this is an artwork, it's a sculpture made out of the ejection of air that comes out as we speak. In Spanish, we have a word for this, it's hálito. In English, you don't really have it, but basically, when we're speaking, the air that is private, that is inside of our body, comes out and it becomes part of the atmosphere. And there is a shape to that. And I was very curious to render visible, render material, what is the shape of this ejection of air as we speak? So what you're seeing is, in fact, a laser tomograph machine that basically measures the density of air as one speaks. The mouth is on this side, and then this is time. And what you're seeing is the phrase being spoken, listen to the world. It's a homage to a Canadian composer that recently passed called R. Murray Schafer. So we're capturing the irrepeatable moment when these words have been said into the atmosphere.
So this is in English, this rendition?
Yeah, this is it being said in English, listen to the world. It's the ejection of that air. But of course, once it goes into the air, it becomes part of the atmosphere, it becomes universal. So I like that language doesn't really matter. It's more about the idea that this expression has now dissipated in the atmosphere, but we captured one little instance of it.
What happened if you asked the speaker to repeat it? Did you have a similar?
That's a great question, and I love it. Here's why. Even the same person saying the same thing 10 seconds later in the same room will give you a completely different shape, because the way that nonlinear fluid dynamics works is that it cannot be controlled, it's chaotic. And so this moment where it created the shape will never be repeated. And it is in this irrepeatability that I think the piece has its merit. It's romantic precisely because it's a moment in time that will never happen again.
You can liken it to dance.
You can liken it to dance or every breath we take, right? Every breath is different. We are a different person with each breath. And I think that that's an interesting part of being an artist, is to kind of reflect on the passage of time, but also on the idea of impermanence, right? Montaigne said that to philosophize is to learn how to die. I think that art is similar. We're thinking about the fact that we will end, and we're curious about, well, what is it that we leave as a legacy? How can we have an impact over our context and our atmosphere? In this case, this artwork is paradoxical in the sense that you're taking something that's invisible, something that's irrepeatable, and then constructing it out of something that is very solid, it's very material, very tactile. And I think that that tension is what we're looking for in this work.
Would it be interesting to record it when the atmosphere is really cold and you have the vapor around the breath?
We tried that. So the original idea was to try and do it with cameras instead of laser. And if you were in a very cold room and you could see your breath come out, then there is a world where we could have done this optically with cameras. But it turned out that the amount of time that the air is hanging out in space was not enough for us to capture with cameras. So instead, what we did is we shot a laser into the direction of the motion of the air. And this laser measures, think of it as bread slices, so slices of density in a particular instant in time. So it's like a snapshot. Think of it as a strobe light of laser that captures all of that density. And then with these slices, we use a technology called photogrammetry to create a 3D model. and then 3D print that. So in fact, when I first made the tests for projects like this, we started investigating this in 2015. I called my galleries and I said, guys, I'm a sculptor now. Of course, the difference of this kind of sculpture is that this is not something that I'd made with my hands. It actually emerges from the capture of this movement. So in that sense, it's closer to photography almost than it is of a sculpture material plastic way.
So what did you choose? What element did you choose to make this out of?
So we originally did some tests with steel. So my very first 3D printed speech bubbles were small steel sculptures that would fit in your hand. But then when we decided to make something that was more environmental, something larger, we decided to go to aluminum because aluminum allows us to have something that's lighter. I wanted this to be like a cloud that would float, yet it would be metallic and shiny. And the reason it would be shiny or reflective is that I wanted it to be also in conversation with the atmosphere. So the choice of that metal was also, it's a very Canadian element, right? So aluminum is one of the chief elements that exports from Canada. And because it's meant to be a homage and a relationship between Mexico and Canada, not only did I choose that element based on this background, but also the choice of what words to say comes also from a tradition of experimentation in Canada that's happened for the past 100 years, where our artists like our Murray Schafer, are concerned with landscape. They're concerned with environment. They're concerned with country, with countryside. And so for me, the idea that this was reflected in the artwork was important. So this artwork comes from a specific history, right? In Mexico, we represent this hálito, this breath, with volutes, which is this beautiful phylactery or this kind of glyphs that show a turbulence in midair. And if you were to look at those in terms of the science, you would see that the motion of that air, even back 600 years ago in Mexico, follows the rules of physics. There's an equation called Navier-Stokes, which describes how air flows in midair, and it follows the eddies and turbulence of Navier-Stokes. So when I looked at that, I said, okay, but what does it really look like? I mean, is there a way to make visible the fact that air is private and inside of us, but then it's public and we all take part of it? And I really like the idea that sometimes we take for granted the air, but it's there always. It gives us life and it interconnects. These words that I'm saying will end up in your lungs. And there's something poetic about that, about interpenetration of bodies. So in order to be able to register that technically, we first tried camera arrays and a cold room, right? So that we would be able to see the breath. Then we tried, but that wasn't good enough. Then we tried to enhance that with vaping. So we had the scientists vape so that as they spoke, the air would be retained longer in midair. But even then, the capture was not something that we could create something solid with. And that's when we moved to work with NYU, Georgia Tech and Auburn universities to research a way in which laser could capture the slices in 3D in a specific moment in time. When we did that, we were really impressed because the quality of the scans and the speed was amazing. And it also gave us a way to create the 3D models out of that. And so those 3D models became something that we could print. First, we printed it with 3D printers, and then we used a thing called CNC cutting. CNC cutting is basically, or CNC drawing is basically, you have this machine that cuts the image or the 3D model onto styrofoam. And then we covered the styrofoam with wax, which then allowed us to do a lost wax cast. So it was all very digital until it had to come into the actual creation of the sculpture. Then we connected to 2,000 years of tradition of lost wax sculpture making.
Oh, so the universities must have been really excited to work with you.
And me with them.
Yes.
I think one of the beauties of working today in media art is that you get to collaborate with experts. So for example, this very technology that we developed for it was also useful for them. They wrote a couple of papers. One of them was about the spread of viruses, right? So this happened right before COVID. And now we're very knowledgeable about the fact that as we speak, there is this viruses around us. So this technique now has allowed the scientists to have one more tool to understand how contagion spreads. And then there's a second scientific paper that is from a phonetics perspective. So people who study why people cannot speak properly really want to see if there's certain lisps or certain movement of air that with this tool, they can actually diagnose better what are the problems with this speech impediment. So I love that the same technology developed to make an artwork which is useless except for its symbolic sort of background can also work scientifically.
Yes, so you spoke earlier about this being part of history, going right back.
Yeah. The history, on the one hand, I mean, here at the National Gallery, we're emphasizing the Mexican side of this history because I'm a Mexican Canadian, and this is a gift of Mexico to Canada for Confederation. So in Mexico, in our codices, we would represent speech and song by this turbulence. But in Europe, for example, we had a really long period of mostly medieval texts. It's called phylactery or banderoles, where people represented would be speaking and there would be these kind of words that would kind of come into the space. And this atmospheric condition of words exists in many cultures. So from history and from art history, we take that as an inspiration. But then what we ended up with is so different than what we think a speech bubble would look like. In a comic book, a speech bubble is a cloud-like device that is quite symmetrical. Sometimes it's just an oval and a little arrow, right? This is a true speech bubble. This is what it really looks like. And to us, it was surprising. I love it when an artwork is surprising to the people who are working to develop it, because that's when you sort of see that the elements have their own ideas and their own performances, which ultimately one is not aware of because it's invisible.
Where did the germ of this idea begin?
So I am fascinated by a long Canadian tradition of thinking about the atmosphere as something that is not neutral. So Armory Schaefer comes from a tradition of composers who thought about deep listening, about the idea that there's no such thing as absolute silence, that at any given time, our perceptual apparatus is constantly aware of what's happening, and that even our hearing itself shapes sound in a way that is not objective. Everything that we get through our ears, through the detection of vibration, is a very personal and subjective thing that is influenced by history, by genetics, by culture, by society. And Armour Schaefer coined the term soundscape. And this term is this idea that just like you have a landscape, which is something that we think of as something for the visual sense, he thought of if you stand and you listen, you close your eyes, you will have a soundscape. And this tradition, which is now, I call it a tradition because it's over 6 decades long, right, is something that I think Canada contributed. And so this is a homage to that contribution, is making evident the fact that our senses are operating in ways that sometimes we're subconsciously not even aware of.
Yes, and I think each person probably hears something differently, privately, their own interpretation.
Yeah, and
Yes.
and I think that that's beautiful too, because it gives to a sense of freedom. It also gives to a sense of community, right? Because when we hear and experience something that is shared, we fire our neurons in a way that connects us to each other. And so the atmosphere is this vast pool of experience from which we can each get our own interpretation, but also with which we can have a dialogue and with which we can create community.
Yes, and speaking of visual things, this is in a perfect place because you walk up the hallway And there it is, and it's glory, and it's an amazing piece.
Thank you.
Over on the wall, we have a small
Yeah.
video.
Yeah. So this is the video that shows you the actual laser tomography slices. So each one of these frames of this animation is actually one of those bread slices captured by laser. And so you kind of see the form evolve or be created in midair. So this is important for me to show because originally I am a scientist. I have a chemistry degree, and then I became a visual artist. But to me, it's really important to show that the experimental portion of what you did is evident. Because otherwise, if I tell just a story, people go, oh, yeah, that sounds not true. I love to have that evidence. I love to be able to release the process of making the artwork, which is what this video helps us do.
Thank you so much, Rafael.
It's a pleasure.
And we invite the public to come along to this wonderful piece, see the video, and just enjoy all the information you've told us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rafael. In addition to this wonderful piece, I have Ingrid Berlanga from the Mexican Embassy, the cultural attaché, and Ingrid's going to tell us a little about, too, the history of this actually arriving in the National Gallery.
So we are very pleased to have this piece finally here. This is a process that has taken almost 8 years and has been is finally here thanks to the efforts of the Embassy of Mexico and the Gallery of Canada, the National Gallery. But this couldn't have been possible without the generous donation of the Jumex Foundation of Mexico, which have provided the resources to finance the artwork and to transport it to the gallery. So we are very, very happy as an embassy to see this art piece finally here in this iconic cultural institution of Canada. And it's a very symbolic gift because this is a gift from the Mexican people to the Canadian people on the 150th anniversary of the Confederation. So this is a very symbolic event happening today. We are going to have around 400 people. We are very pleased to see the interest of everyone. And of course, Rafael Lozano is one of the best Mexican international artists who are in Canada and all over the world. So he has been awarded with many prizes. He was the first Mexican to be in the Biennale of Venice. And well, we are very, very honored to have a Mexican like Rafael representing our culture here in Canada.
Thank you very much, Ingrid.
Thank you.